Okay, all right. So take 3. Hopefully this one works.
Let's
said
see.
It's football season. I know it's football season because you're coming back to join us here, man. How's it going? How's life treating you?
Life is good, buddy. Yeah, I am. I'm out in North Carolina right now, seeing some family. Have been down in Athens some. I'll be heading back down there for the Mizzou game next weekend. So, no complaints on my end.
We will talk about that Mizzou game. I think next weekend, Graham. My goodness, dude.
It's a television executive's dream weekend in the SEC, man.
Especially if you're at CBS.
Yeah, you get the SEC East and SEC West championship doubleheader, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and people every time I say that, Graham, people are like, "What about Ole Miss?" Well, y'all got to
Ole Miss.
Y'all got to take care of them for us. You know, like if we be in a 3-way tie, we need Georgia to win here.
I think Ole Miss is good, and they've done some really nice things, but just sort of they feel a lot like last year to me, where schedule luck and some other things kind of allowed them to start out really hot. But I think that they're more like a 5-3 team that's masquerading as a 1-loss team. So we'll see. I could be proven wrong when they come to Sanford Stadium, though.
Yeah, and that LSU game boosted them. LSU's going to have to really get on board here, and then they'll figure that out in 2 weeks. I want to talk to you about Georgia, Florida. It's the SEC matchup of the weekend. Mm-hmm. Graham, let me first start off by asking you this. First off, I'm not saying there is a lot of people barking, pun intended, at Carson Beck, but why all the disrespect for Carson Beck? Like, I see it here and there. I mean, like, dude is like
I don't get it.
7th in the nation in passing yards. What are we doing?
Not only is he like, high up there in passing yards, but he's done that without playing really any fourth quarter except for Auburn. He's done that without like having a bunch of turnovers. He's been extremely accurate as a passer. Like his time to throw in the pocket is one of the lowest in college football right now. Like he gets the ball out quickly. He sees everything well. I've been very impressed with him. And, I think the thing that's kind of maybe scary a little bit for future Georgia opponents is it seems like he's still getting better. Every week you see him do something that he wasn't really doing back in September. So sky's the limit for him, it feels like.
And, dude, he's got all the tools. Like, I think he's like – so I think it was the Auburn game. Maybe you saw this. Kublik, posted this. It's Kentucky. His mobility inside the pocket, where he might not be the fastest dude. He's not going to beat you. Dude, he is one of the most athletic dudes inside that pocket that you're going to find. It honestly, there was a Brady play that somebody like quote tweeted on it. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
But, Graham, I will say that he's had a lot of injuries around him too, which has been more impressive. That's what I think people don't really realize is there's been a lot of injuries up there for the Dogs.
There has. And I mean, when you talk about Beck in particular, like you lost Amarius Mims in the middle of the South Carolina game while you were, I think, down, 11 points. And there's people that coming into the season thought like he may end up being the first tackle taken in the next NFL draft from a physical gift standpoint. He is how you draw up an offensive tackle in the lab. So like you lose him off the right side, and then you have a true freshman, or I'm sorry, you have a redshirt freshman on the left side of your line who was in his first SEC start. And like things weren't going well for Georgia already in that game. And you switch your starting left guard out to right tackle. So now you have a guy playing left guard who's never played. And basically the blind side of Carson Beck's offensive line is two young guys who had never played in an SEC game. And he remained poised. He came out, Georgia in that game was really struggling, and they were kind of stuck playing in a phone booth against South Carolina. And they came out at halftime and he hits 2 deep passes, and then it was kind of on from there. So I've been very impressed with the movement inside the pocket. I've also just been impressed with his kind of trust in the offensive line. And that really, I think, comes back to like his willingness to just get hit. There's the play against Auburn where the middle linebacker comes free right up the A gap. You know, the running back misses the pass protection, and he is about to get hit under the chin, and he stands in on third down and waits for his receiver to clear into that same space and delivers a throw that ended up, you know, keeping that touchdown drive going. Without that touchdown, you know, that game's going to overtime. So I've been very impressed with his kind of poise and, you know, just kind of that calmness that he has about him. It's a little different than the Stetson Bennett experience, but both very effective to this point.
You know what else too? Against Auburn, you know what he said? He was just basically like, hey man, I'm literally just going to find Brock Bowers and say, F it. I mean, he literally just said, F it, Brock out there somewhere. Speaking of him, how is Mr. Bowers? How's his health?
I mean, you know, I wouldn't say anything at this point in terms of timetable for return. It's still, you know, just a week and a half or so off of surgery. I mean, he had that surgery 8 days ago. So we'll wait and kind of see where he is as he starts moving and running and all of that good stuff. But I think everything went well with his surgery. You know, I know he's been around the team, you know, they're kind of coaching up the guys and encouraging them through walkthroughs and practices. So he's still very engaged. I would not be surprised at all if he's on Georgia's travel roster this weekend, even though he's 100% out. I want to be clear about that. But like Georgia kept Nolan Smith on their travel roster last year because he was a leader and he was a really good player and he was kind of an emotional part of that team. And I think that Bowers may end up in a similar type of role over the next couple of weeks.
Makes complete sense. Let's move to this game. Look, Graham, we talked about Carson Beck just a second ago. You know who really had let me say this. It's going to come off wrong. I kind of expected a little bit of this from Carson Beck because I saw him late in that national championship game. I saw him during the year last year. I saw the tools. So I'm like, oh, okay, like this kid can play. All right, like this kid can really play.
He's like Nussmeier from the LSU
He's exactly
side.
like Nussmeier, okay? But, man, Graham, I look at Graham Mertz and be like, man, look how many people were wrong about him, dude. He can play. Yeah. He can play.
You know, I used to get myself in trouble with Florida fans, especially when Mullen was still there, because you know I thought some of the takes around Mullen and Smart were ridiculous, you know, and they got really bad after that 2020 Florida victory in Jacksonville. This idea that he was just the superior coach in that rivalry, and obviously, you know, the sample size of the last 2 years kind of bore that all out. But
right.
I think Billy Napier deserves a ton of credit, and his staff deserves a ton of credit for looking in the transfer portal and saying, which one of these guys is going to fit what we do? Not who's the most talented necessarily, or like who had the biggest numbers last year, who's going to be the sexy portal get that's going to make the fan base happy with us. But like he went and looked at his system, and Graham Mertz was a very good match for that. You know, he's not what you would call like your traditional dual threat, but he's very, very good throwing on the run, particularly on those play action rollouts. Like he seems more comfortable on those than he does standing in the pocket a lot of times. And I think, you know, he just has been a good fit for what they want to do with their run game as well. He understands, I think, the concepts of the offense and the way they're trying to influence defenses. And I mean, you know, Kirby Smart said it this week. If you look at the last 2 games, I think he's the number 1 passer in the country from yard standpoint.
It's literally Mertz and then a guy named Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Not to get you off track here on your show, but like the narrative around SEC quarterbacks coming into the year and even through September was that like this is a really down year for quarterbacks in the conference. And there was all this, you know, like, oh, Devin Leary is probably the best quarterback in the league or the most talented one. And you look at like Beck, Mertz, Jaden Daniels, even Jackson Dart in certain respects. Like there's some guys that are playing really good football. Spencer Rattler has been phenomenal with very little help around him.
No. So it's interesting you say that because I talked about this last week, and I have my notes here. As my good friend Josh Pate would say, paper pop it. Okay.
There you go. Paper pop it.
Of the top 20 quarterbacks in the country, 9 of them, okay, and I'll do 21 because Jackson Dart was during the bye week. I will even put him in there. So 10 quarterbacks in this top 20 either played in the SEC or currently in the SEC in passing yards, touchdowns, QBR, completion percentage.
I didn't know that. That's impressive.
TJ Finley, JT Daniels, okay, are both on this list.
All
Okay?
right. Well,
that is what but my point is, then like you mentioned, the narrative around SEC quarterbacks is, oh, well, they're not that great. Well, you have 2 here that went to lower divisions and absolutely killed it.
Yeah.
You know, so I didn't think TJ Finley would have 2,000 yards passing in his career, much less have it halfway through a season, okay? So same with JT Daniels to some extent.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously that's not the same as playing in the SEC, but it does speak to the guys that they left, like the guys that forced them out of that room.
Right.
Pretty talented if those types of talents and former blue chip recruits are going down a division.
Well, how do you see this game playing out? So earlier this week, I talked about, Graham, that I think that Florida – I just don't see a scenario where they win without Graham Mertz doing what he did in South Carolina.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that, quite frankly. And that's not to be disrespectful to Mertz, but like what's really caught my eye about him throughout the year. So like against South Carolina, he had a game that was a bit of an anomaly for him in the sense that like he threw the ball downfield. His average depth of target was 11.2 yards in that game on all throws. On non-screen throws, it was 13.1 yards. Like they really aired it out in that game, and we hadn't really seen them do that much prior to it. Against Vanderbilt, which was another game where he put up really nice numbers, 30 of 37, 254 yards, 3 touchdowns. Mertz, his average depth of target in that game was 1.8 yards on 37 attempts. Like that's basically like 55 air yards to get to 250 plus yards passing.
What about that A-dot? Huh?
Yeah. So like it's just those guys were, just doing a lot of really good stuff after the catch. And that's kind of been his MO through a lot of the year. His A-dot on the season's only 6.8 yards. His adjusted completion, like we were just talking about, really accurate guy, 85%. I think Georgia's secondary, they get credit because they're Georgia and the Georgia defense, and they've been very good. But the thing that has changed a little bit is that Georgia's defensive line this year has not been very good. They have not been good getting pressure with 4. And despite that, like you go back and watch that Kentucky game, there were times where Georgia's back end was covering for 5, 6, 7 seconds, and guys weren't getting open. Now, I like Kentucky's receivers a lot more than I like LSU, or not LSU's. I'm sorry, a lot more than I like Florida's receivers.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that Pearsall scares you, but other than him, I don't know who really stretches Georgia's defense vertically. And what Florida has done this year has been, create leverage issues. Get guys in motion pre-snap to get them outside the numbers or outside the hashes and roll the pocket towards them. And you could do that against Georgia, and you could be effective at times. Like Georgia's inside linebackers have been good in coverage this year, but they haven't been great. It's certainly like there was some games where it felt like a problem spot early in the year. My point in all this is like, I don't know that you can beat Georgia going 4 or 6 yard chunks at a time all the way down the field. Florida is low in average starting field position. So it feels like this is a game where they have to get some turnovers to score.
My thought, Graham, is you got a LSU, and LSU didn't come close. Okay, don't misinterpret, or just, I'm not trying to say like LSU was close in winning that game last year. Mm-hmm. You got to LSU or Ohio State them, right? Like you're gonna have to hit the big play on them, and if you don't, you're in trouble. But you know what's crazy? y'all secondary has been it flip-flopped. It was the front seven for the last 2 years, and now the secondary is suffocating. Before we move on to around the rest of the SEC, how do you see score-wise? Do you think Georgia couple scores here, or what do you see?
I think that Georgia will need to resist the desire to just run the ball over and over and over.
Right.
And I think that's why the over-under in this game is where it's it's under 50 points, I think, right now. And I think people expect that with Brock Bowers out, they're just going to lean on the ground game, and they will to a certain extent. But don't be surprised if they come out passing early just to make it even easier. Yeah, and I think Georgia will want to kind of game script Florida out of this game. I know Florida came from behind against South Carolina last week, throwing the ball downfield. I don't think they can do that against Georgia, and similar to what they did to Kentucky. So Georgia's number one in the SEC and least number of explosive plays allowed. I think that it's just going to be hard for Florida to take those little bites out of the apple. I've got Georgia. No one's asked me for a prediction yet. I'm going to say Georgia wins this one 38-17.
I had it 35-17. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, that feels right. And I mean, it's a weird game. Like last year, Georgia had that weird third quarter where Florida scored, I think, like 20 unanswered and made it close again, and then they pulled away. So, I don't know. It's never one you take for granted when you cover Georgia, just because strange things happen in it. But I don't think Florida, they've had a great couple of weeks. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think that all that stuff's going to really translate on Saturday against this Georgia team.
I agree. What else have you seen around the SEC that has caught your eye? Now, you don't have to tell me LSU's offense, but if you want to, you can. But what outside of them, what else have you seen that you either like, dislike, or what are the big bulletin board things for you that right now, a little bit halfway through the year?
I mean, it's hard not to look at what's going on at Texas A&M. It felt like things, like on paper, I had Texas A&M second in my SEC West preseason poll at Media Days, man, and I had LSU first. And I thought that was kind of how things would shake out. Like I thought that A&M and Wegman's obviously been hurt, but it's just like I thought that their offense would find more explosiveness because there's tons of talent on it. And then I thought all that defensive talent would be a year older and really buckle down. And the defense has been pretty good at times, but yeah, man, it feels like they keep playing games where they kind of play better than the team across from them, but they still find ways to lose. And to me, that usually indicates that there's a coaching problem. And so, if Fisher if Fisher gets kind of shown the door, that starts the carousel spinning in the league. You know what I mean? I would just be curious to see what direction that search goes in. That's a program that kind of just brings drama with it. So I've got an eye on that. I have an eye on Tennessee, Kentucky on Saturday. That feels like a swing game for both of their seasons in terms of Heupel. You had a great 2022 and your fan base is really invested. They're throwing lots of NIL money behind your program. But if you lose this game, it's a little bit harder to sell that we're going, where we say we're going. And right. Ditto for Kentucky. Stoops has obviously got a bigger sample set, but I just think that relationship is starting to feel a little tenuous. And so, that's what I'm watching. And I'll just say it, man. It's hard not to, since we're talking about Tennessee and we're talking about things that have caught my eye this week, it is hard not to look at some of the details around this Michigan story that have been coming out and ask if the team that Michigan was kind of trying to keep out of the playoff last year wasn't the Vols. I feel like that's the one that makes the most sense. Now, I don't have any information. I'm not reporting anything. I want to be really clear on that. But, I mean, Tennessee went into that game last year as I think a 20-something point favorite. They lose by 25, like that. It's a huge swing. And you look at what South Carolina had done up to that point and in the weeks prior, and it's just a very outlierish result. So I am curious.
You're talking about the South Carolina, just to give context to someone who hadn't read it. You're talking about the South Carolina game that Tennessee got blown out in.
Yeah, last year, when they were Beamer all they had to do was win out to get into the playoff.
And Shane Beamer gave I always call coaches. Well, why are you calling Michigan? That was my number one question. Why do they have you on phone? Why do they have a phone record of you calling?
Do they have a phone? I didn't know this. Was there?
He was asked a question about it today, and that's where all that came from. So I'm like,
okay.
Wait, what happened? It really caught me off guard why they're asking South Carolina about Michigan.
Last night, Football Scoop put out a story that said a source with direct knowledge indicated that Michigan may have attempted to assist the opposition of a potential CFP opponent in an effort to disrupt that team's potential path to the playoff.
And then all of a sudden, here comes South Carolina.
Yeah.
Right.
And, they if you look at what would have happened for Michigan if they lose to Ohio State, if you're hedging your bets, right? What do they need? They needed Tennessee to lose, and they needed Clemson to lose. And both those things happened in consecutive weeks, right? And so I just think that
and Graham, quite honestly, they needed Bama to get another loss. I'm not saying LSU,
right?
But hey man, we're talking about Tennessee. I mean, Bryce Young had nowhere to go with the football in that second half.
You're talking about the early the
Bama Tennessee game. I'm like, because I remember last year, Graham. So we break down the film on Sundays, and when we were breaking down Alabama, because it's always Tennessee, they have a bye week, and then LSU, right? That's how their schedule always works. And I'm like, Tennessee, the worst defensive pass team in the SEC, like worse than Vandy a year ago. They're playing man-to-man coverage across the board and winning? You got to be kidding me. Okay? You got to be kidding me. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, now this story comes out, and then the SEC's involved. I'm like, man, thank God Brian Kelly ain't got nothing to do with it right now. That's all I kept saying.
Yeah.
To your point,
I think – no, I mean, there was it was also, pointed out today by some people that are smarter than I am, that Beamer, his defensive coordinator was a DB coach for Harbaugh in 2009, and in that game against Tennessee, South Carolina, their defense wore wristbands for the first time and only time all year. So it's just an interesting.
Bro, Beamer's in trouble.
Well, and Beamer, not to dig up old bodies or whatever, but Google Shane Beamer WikiLeaks. Beamer, when he was at Virginia Tech, got in trouble for taking a playbook, a Wake Forest playbook, and using it against them. And then when that story all came out, when he was an assistant at Georgia under Kirby, so Kirby had to put out a statement about it, and Georgia fined him, I think, $25,000 at the time, and then he left after that season. So I don't know, man. It's an interesting. I like Shane, man. I think Shane's I like what he's doing for South Carolina. And I think he's doing a great job on the trail and all of that. But it's like I said before, not reporting anything. We're just two guys here speculating, having a good time, talking some SEC football. But when I read that last night, I started thinking, I was like, well, who would they have wanted to keep out of the playoff, And I started kind of going back through the week-by-week CFP rankings and seeing how all that shook out and the hypotheticals. It was like, oh, well, there's the outlier event of the entire 2022 college football season was that Tennessee-South Carolina game. So, I don't know, man. We'll see. I'm sure there's more coming out every hour, it feels like, about that.
It's going to be interesting. I just like sitting back watching this, but yeah. Anyway, I mean, Graham, they had laminated sheets of the hand signals at Ohio State. Dude, come on. I want to circle back to one thing, and then I'll get you out of here. A&M. So, Graham, I got to admit, so me and the team were, again, like we talked about watching the film on Sundays. So obviously we've had a whole, what feels like 2 weeks, I guess, to really break down Alabama. A&M should have beat them.
Oh,
Jimbo royally messed that up, dude. And I feel like if they win that football game, they're going to beat Tennessee the next week because they got all the momentum. Like, I fully believe they go into Knoxville and win that game.
They probably should have won that game as well.
Also, they probably should have won that game. Man, I as a person who covers a team that plays them every year, I want Jimbo to remain there. They got to make a move. Like, it's over, right? Like, it's got to be over.
Yeah, well, and I mean, like, I think about, Kirby Smart came in 2016 and Georgia went 8-5, but then in 2017, they go 13-1, I think it was, or 12-1 in the regular season to win the SEC title, and then they go beat Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and they're in the national championship game, and they did that with a roster that was left over. There were some guys that Kirby had brought in, but
it's from, man.
Well, Fromm was a Kirby recruit, but like Nick Chubb, Sony Michel,
that's right.
Lorenzo Carter, Davin Bellamy, Roquan Smith, dude, like all those guys were on the roster that Rick had recruited. And I look at the roster that Jimbo brought into A&M. Now, we're in the portal era now, so it's harder to keep that roster intact if the staff turnover happens. But shit, some of those guys are probably going to leave anyways after this season. So I think like you still have a window here if you get a good coach in who has his stuff together and knows how to develop and organize to go make some hay and to, go beat Texas when your old rival shows up in the league again and like kind of just cash in some small way on the historic recruiting class that you had in the 2022 cycle.
I mean, and look, not going for it on fourth down. If you can't get 6 inches, Graham, you don't deserve to win anyway. And they couldn't, and they didn't win. So it's going to be interesting to see how they finish out. Good luck to your Dogs this weekend, man. Thank you for joining us. Tell everybody where they can catch all your content.
Yeah, for sure. You can check me out over on dogcentral.com. We've got an awesome community that's been kind of built there. Inside intel, injury updates, stuff that you're not going to find in public. Come check us out over there. And you can find me on Twitter at Graham Coffey DC or on YouTube, podcast, all that stuff, Dog Central. So
yeah, and I just noticed that you said that. We got.
You're good, dude. It's all good. No worries. Hey, it's kind of fun to see it still.
Well, I do hope to see you, and I'll probably ask you even if LSU's not in there, but I really hope we get to see you in
Atlanta.
In Atlanta.
Will you be there if the Tigers make it?
If they go again a second time, I'll be there.
All right, I'll see you there.
I mean, like.